Hey, this is Mike Byrnes with another episode of Business Bests. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you watching. Today, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into business planning and talk about the offsite meeting. As a consultant, big nerd, an offsite meeting to me is like a little kid going to Disney. I love offsite meetings. I've seen bad ones and good ones, but overall, they can be really beneficial to a company or nonprofit or whoever it is that's trying to do the work. In my travels, I've seen a lot of things that have gone well and some things that haven't. But before I get into kind of the logistics of how to do that and what the best practices are, I really want to dive into why you want to have an offsite and then things to maybe potentially avoid. So number one really is that people get to know each other for the first time. You know, if you're bringing people from across the country to an offsite, they're engaging as humans in the real world. And get to see body language, get to see how people care about other people, and a lot of different things can be beneficial from being in person. So from a new relationship standpoint, that can make those relationships even stronger, and that can help your company. So that's on a one-to-one scale. Number two is really the whole team building approach. There are a lot of team building exercises you can do within an offsite. You don't have to do them, but just getting people together helps them realize that these are the people I'm working with, and these are the people that how they look, how they carry themselves. You're probably going to get to learn a little bit more about them personally, and honestly, most of the time you're going to be closer with those individuals. But now you're interacting as a team and functioning as a team together on this offsite. So team building is really valuable. It will help progress whatever you're trying to do if you can get these people together at least once a year, maybe more. Number three is if you're going to bring people together, if I asked you if you had to sell something, would you be better on the phone, on a Zoom, or in person? Everyone's going to say in person, right? And so when it comes to buy-in, and trying to get people to kind of have all the oars going in the same direction and whatever the idea is, whatever the strategy might be, buy-in is super important. So getting people together in an offsite can help them not only take your idea and run with it, but you might actually come up with they might come up with their own idea, and then you're buying in on what they're presenting or what they're bringing to the table. And the other thing is as ideas are generated between the team, so we talked about the benefit of getting people together as a team, but as those ideas formulate, they kind of all feel like owners, and so the buy-in is universal with all those people that are attending the offsite. Believe it or not, people are just more creative at offsites. I think a lot of times if you need to do some brainstorming or come up with some creative solution, ideas are generated better, and I think it's part of it's just the change of scenery. You could do it in your own office. I don't really recommend that. Even if it's in your own town, it's kind of close. We'll talk about some strategies of whether you want to have like a boondoggle and go far away and have it be kind of a rewards trip type of thing. You don't have to do that. That's an added expense. But the ability to get people away to think creatively, that change of scenery really does have a benefit on that. The other benefit of being away is there's just less distractions. If you're in your office and you walk out to go to the bathroom and you see like a whole bunch of bells and whistles going off that you have to go put out these fires or this client's calling or whatever, you're going to lose focus on what you're there to accomplish in that offsite. And so the ability to have the offsite somewhere secluded, and there's even best practices we could talk about like limiting phone use and computer use and all that type of stuff. But to get people secluded away from their normal environment will help them be laser focused. And then whatever you're trying to achieve is more likely to happen. So that's another benefit that you want to think about with offsites. Number 6 is better communications. And so if you think about how things might work, I am reaching out to a different department, or if your organization is not that big, just another person in your firm, and they're really busy, and maybe it takes a day or longer for them to get back. Maybe they lost something in inbound, and so all of a sudden the whole communication stream kind of breaks down, or it gets at least drawn out. Having people in the same room and focusing on that same topic, the communication is instantaneous, right? I mean, they might pause, but the reality is they're right there, and you can get things accomplished way faster if you're communicating right across the table, or at least in the same room. This next one can be a big benefit of an offsite is kind of creating synergies or better alignment. Too often I see department heads that just don't get along, whether it's partners or a smaller organization, or if it's something bigger, it is those department heads. And they have their own focus that, this is what they're hired to do, and this is what they're trying to achieve, and this is how I'm going to do it, and here's the people that I have, and I'm protective of my people and their hours and the budget that I have and all that stuff. So sometimes there's this kind of adversarial approach to working together within organizations. People are very cautious. That stuff can kind of get broken down if you assign two people in an offsite to try to accomplish a goal, and they're actually interacting together, and then they start to think about themselves as a team more as those different silos that need to function separately. That happens at all different sizes, whether it's a 5-person firm or a 500-person firm. You get this kind of normal tension between within the organization. And so I would recommend that you do an offsite just to see how people can maybe come together and think alike. They don't have to have the same thoughts. I should rephrase that. They just want to come up with the same goal and try to figure out what the solution is if there's a problem they're trying to get over. Number 8 for why to have an offsite might be that reward thing that I just hinted at. You might, when you select the people that would attend the offsite, you might select those people that have done really well in your organization. And so part of that offsite is a reward. And we'll talk about what the agenda could look like and how that could flow. But you might get them exposure to something that they wouldn't normally get in their own life, in their day-to-day work, whatever it might be. And so when they leave, they feel super energized, they feel super appreciated, etc. So the reward part is very important. You can actually do in the meeting rewards too, so you can actually make part of the agenda, highlighting people that have done really well and bring them up and present them some award, maybe some gift. In this smaller, intimate setting, because maybe you have 8 to 10 people. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish in an offsite. Could be more, could be less. But that intimate type of recognition can go a long way. So the offsite definitely can have a reward component for the people that come. And even if they come just to have a seat at the table so that their voice can be heard, in some ways that's a reward. So at the bare minimum, if the offsite is done the right way, people are going to feel like they, again, had that voice and they were listened to. So that could be one of the strategies for having an offsite. Wrapping up the top 10, getting close to wrapping it up, number 9 is education. And this is where you might have an internal person or an external person get these key people in this room to be a little bit more educated on the topic. This topic could be something related to what they do in a day-to-day world, or it could be just something that is just good for a manager to know, or just good to live your life. Or it could be, motivational, or it could be something about their health or whatever it might be. There's all kinds of topics you can do here, but that could be one of those benefits of having an offsite. Lastly, I know there's other benefits, but trying to keep it to the top 10 list here. The final one is probably the biggest one, is just better outcomes. Whatever you're trying to accomplish as a business or a nonprofit or whatever, whoever's organizing the offsite, you're more likely to achieve what you're trying to achieve if you have an offsite. There is a cost, and we'll talk about that in a second. So you need to have an ROI on these types of activities. Just having people be out of the office is an expense, right? Because part of their salary is going to be going to dedicated to this timing, whatever it might be, whether it's a day or longer. And so you need to figure out what you're trying to achieve. But most likely, if it's done well, your final outcome is going to be better than the way that your business was running before. You're going to start to see improvements after. And I can say most offsites I've been a part of have had some positive outcome, and they've almost always been beneficial. And I have to, full disclosure, sometimes I facilitate them. So maybe that's why I'm such a big fan of them, because I get paid to do that. But the reality is I've seen a lot of people go through this, and these 10 benefits are very common things that I'll see. And again, there's probably even more that I'm not mentioning on this recording. So a little bit on the cautionary side, I did hopefully a good job of selling why offsites are important, but there is a drawback from time to time. And one of the biggest ones is just the offsite isn't planned well. And we'll go through the best practices from concept to the finish product and what happens after that. But the reality is if it's not planned well, it can be a bad experience, right? A lot of logistics can go into making sure this is planned and then executed and then followed up really well. And so if you don't have the right person in place to make sure that that moves forward, bring in an expert. And I actually am going to recommend at some point you bring in a facilitator too, because that can help in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to get into that now. But one of the drawbacks, again, can be that it's just not planned well. Part two, very close part two, is that the preparation just fails. So one, you have the plan, but two, then you got to execute the preparation piece of that. And there should be probably a checklist of at least 20 things, if not 50 things. And that getting into the nitty gritty of what you need to do and actually making sure you have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, that is really important. So that falls down. Sometimes the devil's in the details. I don't love that saying, but the reality is you can mess up something little and it can turn out to be a bad experience for all those involved. So number three, I would say, is that it's not facilitated well. I'll see a lot of times that like a CEO will want to facilitate the offsite, but they dominate the talking time and they don't listen enough, or they kind of have their own agenda and they're pushing too hard, and you can't really get new ideas, or you can't get someone that's quiet to talk in that type of environment. And a trained facilitator is really good at getting the best out of everybody. And that input is really essential to having a good offsite. So I'll go back into the facilitation part a little bit later. But related to that is that people sometimes talk too much, and that can be a real issue if you have one or two people that are dominant. So it doesn't have to be the head facilitator type, whether it's in-house or a facilitator, but it could just be one of the people sitting around the table, and that they just don't allow others to, one, share the thoughts, or two, if they share the thoughts, they just tear them all down, and that can really ruin the environment. And if the culture is not right, the tone and the openness, the ability to share, of all those things are missing, a lot of times it can be a failure. Like you can end up just having it be a one-person show, and you didn't need an offsite to get that one person's thoughts. You could have just had a one-on-one meeting with them. And so that is an area that you got to be cautious about. And a good facilitator can actually work with that next. So those two are interesting. A good facilitator can work with that one dominant person, because more likely than not, if you are bringing in some successful business leads, whatever they have responsibilities in your organization, one of those people is going to be kind of a dominant super A personality, and they are going to want to take over the meeting. So you're going to have to be prepared so the meeting doesn't become a failure because of that one person just running the show. A big one that can be detrimental to this kind of offsite planning is that there's no follow-up after. So they had a great meeting, but nothing got executed after it. So people felt like, yeah, we accomplished a lot in that meeting, but then there was a big disconnect in how things got incorporated. Did those ideas actually make it on paper? Did they get assigned to the right people to do things? Was the follow-up good? Did it become part of the business plan? Were things regurgitated and were ideas shared with others within the organization so that those good ideas could actually be part of the organization and moving it to success? A lot of times that can be one of the things that falls down. And lastly, on this list of drawbacks, or potential drawbacks, I should say, is that it was just a waste of time. If you don't have the purpose, and if you don't have the facilitator, and you kind of have the agenda too loose and it's not defined, and you're not trying to have actual outcomes come out of this meeting, you can lose sight and spin your wheels in the wrong areas. You can get into details or rabbit holes that you shouldn't be in, and you can waste hours. So you really need to have a strategy of what you're trying to accomplish, some rules of the road, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But that is important to not waste time, like to have some ability to have a positive ROI on this. Whatever you're trying to accomplish, hopefully this offsite's going to make it more successful or more likely to be a success. So I talked a little bit about the benefits, and I talked about some of the potential drawbacks. Now let's dive into the best practices of the offsite. Sometimes it's called a strategy meeting too. It has different names, and you could kind of call it whatever you want to call it. But there are a whole bunch of best practices. And part of it starts before you even get people in the same room, right? And so right out of the gates, what are you trying to accomplish? And this is where I put this under the business planning umbrella because it really should tie into the business plan. Like, what under the business plan are those major initiatives that you're trying to accomplish, and how could the offsite help? It might be able to help in 1, 2, or 3 areas. I mentioned the juggling balls exercise before, of like you juggle too many balls, they all drop to the ground. So the offsite can't cover too many things, but underneath that business plan, what are those major initiatives that are probably the most important? Or maybe the ones that are struggling and you're not reaching those outcomes that you want, and maybe those should be what the purpose of the offsite is. So I like to think about all the questions you would ask, the who, what, why, how, what, all that type of stuff. Well, the purpose part is why. And so you're going to think about what's that purpose, what are you trying to accomplish? The one cautionary thing I would think about is sometimes an offsite has a benefit that you have no idea that was going to be part of the process and then the outcome. And so make sure that you don't suffocate the agenda and the topic so much that you take all the air out of the room and the new ideas die, right? And so you want to make sure that everyone has a leash, like they don't go too wild and go off on different tangents. But if you can kind of let them have a little bit of roaming room, that topic and the purpose of the offsite can go in a way that you had never imagined. And you never know who might have the best idea. It could be someone that you didn't even expect. So I mentioned those questions. That is the why. The who is a big one. Who do you invite? And this is where you might or might not have the senior leadership there, whether they're the ones that run or not. I told you the cautionary tale that might not be a good idea, but maybe they're a participant. I mean, sometimes the CEO, if they are in that room, or the head person, should be more of a listener, maybe even a note taker, and they can be there for certain things that add value, like the opening statement or the thank you at the end or whatever it might be. But all right, so if you're trying to figure out who should be there, an easy one to think about is just like, who are all the most influential people in your organization, department heads, key contributors. Again, if you went with that rewards idea, the best of the best in whatever category that they would get the reward for. And then you think about the list and what you're trying to accomplish. You can have breakouts in an offsite. So if you wanted to have 30 people, for example, maybe you would have 4 or 5 breakouts. 30 people is probably too much unless you're trying to do something at a grand scale. I'm probably more comfortable thinking about like a client focus group, where you probably want to have 8 people, maybe 10. And that because that's probably the max, because if you have more than that, they're not going to be contributing. You can do kind of workshop-y things and break people out and have them work on different projects and then come report back to the larger group. So there is a way to have more people. But I think the more people you have, the less you can hear of each individual voice. The other thing you want to think about, is it just internal people, or are you going to bring external people too? So what does that mean? You might want to bring in a consultant with some kind of expertise, or someone that is kind of part of your ecosystem. Maybe even somebody kind of like in the supply chain of your services, or a complementary service, or a strategic alliance that you work with. In this type of meeting, I don't think you want to have clients or prospects, but there are times we want to bring in an outside party that might think a little bit differently. Maybe we'll bring another idea, maybe has some other expertise, some other point of view. So this is the actual participants. This isn't a guest speaker or someone coming in to be just a sub-segment of the whole day or days. But this is kind of the plan, whether you mix in, you have all the internal people and maybe you mix in 1 or 2 external people. Lastly, I would think about the +1 invite. So if this does fit into the rewards category, it's like a boondoggle or something, You might want to bring the spouse or the significant other of the person that's coming, or at least allow them to bring somebody. That obviously increases the expense. It actually makes it kind of a little bit easier for the family person to get away. In some ways, if they have young kids, they got to get a babysitter, but it's kind of a reward for both the husband and the wife if it's a traditional relationship. The issues with doing that is that you maybe pull somebody away to do kind of that family stuff or couple stuff, and that should be part of it, but you almost have to entertain that non-business related person with something to do during the day, and that's very possible. You know, if you're at a nice resort, it could be a spa day or some excursion or something, and these people can go out and do something fun, and they meet up after kind of the business portion of it is done. And depends on how heavily this offsite is weighted toward the rewards part. Sometimes the actual business discussions are a minority of the time, and that's really up to you to decide. So those are kind of the who do you invite, and that's one of those things you need to think about in the planning part. What and where, they go together pretty well, so I'll cover them at the same time. On the what side, like your budget, what's the budget look like, what are you trying to accomplish, etc. And then that obviously goes hand in hand with where. If you're trying to have some big splashy thing that makes makes people feel super rewarded, you probably don't want to just use the local library's back office boardroom type of thing. You might want to go to a destination place, and that obviously the budget and location tie in hand. So maybe the next step up is a hotel banquet room or function room or something, nothing too frilzy. But then maybe you want to think about something that's even better, like there's ways to have like specialized offsites that can really wow people. You do need some meeting space, comfortable chairs. Maybe you need a TV. Maybe you need the whiteboards and the flipboards and all that type of stuff. Kind of basic things that you would think you would need. Whether it's the horseshoe tables that you can move around, or whether it's round tables or whatever, you kind of want to have a strategy of what you're trying to accomplish, and then you can kind of back end what the location would look like and what those key components of the offsite would be. So how do you do the offsite? That's a big one. I already talked about whether you hire the facilitator or not. Important. I think you need to do it. The second part is, is it a multi-day approach? When do guests come in? You should know if they're coming in from different parts of the country. Is the airport easy to connect to? Are there direct flights? That type of stuff. Of which, can they get there early, or do they have to come in the evening before? So you start to think about the agenda. You start to think about meals. You start to think about breaks, because none of us can really think really well if we go all day long, all the time. We're going to need some breaks to let our brains start to digest what we just talked about, and then start to just have a fresh look for the next topic, or the fresh perspective on the next topic. So what's the how look like? Part of that how might be, what are the tech requirements, if you need any? Are you going to play videos? Are you going to be able to jot notes online? Are you going to have that exception to the rule where one person's not there and they need to use a video conferencing ability to connect in? Believe it or not, we're all humans and life gets in the way, and so somebody might have an emergency, might not be able to fly in, or there's a snowstorm or some weather condition, or the planes are just a mess and they're not going to make it on time. So maybe you want to incorporate that, or maybe they just would tie into the next offsite if you are going to do a series of these. So that's something to think about. And last part on there is just the social activities and what you're going to do from the agenda, and I'll talk about those more in a minute. After you get that all together, then it's the next stage is the invitation part. So you've figured out all those key questions, the who, why, who, what, how, where, all those types of things. The invitation, then, you really want to have a good first impression. You don't want someone to feel like this is a chore that they have to go to it. So you want to have some kind of wow effect, whether it's a theme, have a marketing person help with the communications on this. Use AI if you have to, if you need to have like that extra resource. And then in that communication, you're going to have to start to think about some logistics too. So if you're going to feed them meals, does someone have some dietary concern, or is there something that you should know before they come? And then one thing that you might want to think about is their homework. Don't use the word the homework, but if they need to bring something to the table and they need to be prepared to have the time be effective, make sure you communicate that, and whether it's that one big broad communication or whether you have to personally communicate to that person what they should bring to the table. So that could look like client research, your business updates on whatever the existing business plan looks like. So you have the key performance indicators. It could be a competitive review. It could be an outside look at the future. Some independent consulting body or third party has done some review of what the environment's going to look like for your business or your nonprofit in the near future, and all that stuff can be really impactful. But if you showed up without that information and then get asked drill down questions on it, you might not be prepared. So that homework is a key to the future success. One last thing I should note before the facilitation actually happens is that facilitator, if you do bring them in, that you actually get them up to speed on your industry and your business. Sometimes they're just generalists and they're not focused in on just doing this type of work within the industry. It's nice to hire someone that is an expert in what you do. But if you don't, you got to get them a little up to speed so they can facilitate in the right way. So that's as an industry, and that's specific to your company too. You might want to give the facilitator as much information as you can. And then lastly, you might want to start to think about what the elephant in the room is. Maybe there's one person or one department that's just not carrying their weight. Or there's something that is a roadblock that they're not doing the work that they should, and there could be other groups that kind of attack them or point the fingers at them, so to speak. So if the facilitator knows about that tension between the two groups, they can be way better at, kind of heading off a big problem before it goes off the cliff, so to speak. So you can see how sometimes backstories will evolve very quickly when people are in person and they really don't like each other, and all of a sudden this tension and hits and water boils over kind of thing. If a facilitator knows that that's happening or potentially gonna happen, then that he or she can be way better at, again, diverting that issue when it happens. Before I get into the best practices of the actual offsite, one thing to think about too, when we talked about the who, I forgot to mention that if this is something that you do on a regular basis, be cautious about always having the same people there. But you might have some people that really are great at offsites, so you might have some consistency. So let's say a third of the room repeats, and then they maybe they have like a 2 or 3 year term if this is going to be something you do every year, and they phase out. Maybe they go off for a year or two, and then maybe you can circulate them back in if you think it's important. If you always have the same people in the same room, you're not going to get that new perspective or new insights. And so I'm kind of always trying to have people do a slightly different look every time they do an offsite. One of the other things you need to do in the preparation stage too is to think about the end of the actual offsite. So you actually maybe have materials, so that's something you need to think about in advance. You definitely should have some supplies, maybe some of the stuff you need to bring in-house, whether like they don't have the right type of catering, or you need to bring in some things that, whether if you're kind of going low budget, you're going to bring in your own snacks or something like that. But at the end, I usually like to recommend that there's some kind of reward or some kind of thank you. Maybe it is even a framed picture, and you have a photographer take a picture, but the frame is engraved of people that helped or were part of this group. And again, the offsite doesn't have to be called business offsite or strategy meeting. You could come up with some kind of sexier name for it, so people think it's really cool that they're going, and you have like a marketing theme to it all. Really good event planners are kind of trained to think that way. So again, something like a frame or some kind of reward gift, something that makes them feel valued, that they spent their time to roll up the sleeves and share their knowledge and their expertise and their experiences. I think that's really valuable to think in advance of what that would look like. Thank you. My name is Mike Byrnes. This has been another episode of Business Best. I appreciate you tuning in.